augmented reality and virtual reality. So why not let's start with James, and then we'll go to Mark, and finally Stella, and then we'll leave it to you guys to have a discussion. So let's say 5 minutes each, 5 to 10 if needed.
Alright, well look, my background in augmented reality is obviously very job specific. We in the mining industry have to perform tasks, and in that we are driving, or we're having operators that are operating heavy equipment, which can be quite dangerous. So we have to give them as much information as they can to perform the job. Now, to do that, of course, because people aren't used to the environment that they're operating in, and it's very hard to gain a knowledge of that, of course we have to highlight things that those people will not naturally recognise, whether it be fault lines in rock, whether it be obstacles which they cannot normally perceive because of the dust and the smoke. So therefore a lot of the work that we do is to take other sensors, amalgamate the information, and then give it to the user in a way that they can understand and then identify. And of course, over time, that person then, even though that information may be coming to them through their own normal sensors, as like if you take an infrared image and shift it up so there's now a visual light image, it is now, they are able to perceive in the infrared, right? So that they can now see through certain levels of smoke and dust and haze. Of course, it's not only peculiar to us, the military have been doing this for years. And so what happens over time is that the person starts to identify with that spectrum, that new visual spectrum, and they start to recognise it as peculiarity. What this is not, however, and this is what we're looking to work on, is a new qualia. Currently, we take the existing qualia, that is the existing experience you've got, and simply provide information onto that experience. The future, however, will probably be different. That is, I suspect that in the not too distant future we'll be able to inject signal directly, which will give people an entirely new qualia, that is a new experience of sensation, which is quite outside the sensory experience we have now. We have cases of that happening where we have people who have been colourblind, for instance, and then have later had certain parts of their brain stimulated where they have perceived colours. And these people referred to them, I think the term was Martian colours and things like that. Interesting, quaint terms to show that they were seeing things, that they were having an experience, in the same way we have experience of colour, like red or green. They were having experiences they've never had before. And so I think the greatest hope and interest for the near future will be augmented qualia, that is new qualia being introduced directly into people's central nervous systems, which will give us new experiences, not just overlaying experiences onto our existing experience. Anyway, thank you.
That's good. Let me start off with a few comments about virtual reality. When I started working in virtual reality, which was 1990, virtual reality was envisioned to be a head-mounted display and a data glove, neither of which any of us use anymore for a whole bunch of reasons, one of which is that it's very difficult to keep your arms suspended from your body for any period of time, and the amount of torque on the neck caused by a heavy head-mounted display makes it actually very bad for you, never mind what it's doing to your visual system. And yet, we are exposed to virtual reality everywhere, every day, because virtual reality became the dominant representation paradigm for electronic entertainment. And so it doesn't matter whether you go to the cinema and see something that was pre-rendered or go to your Xbox and see something that's being rendered live, we actually have managed to thoroughly incorporate the virtual. So that's done. It doesn't look like what we thought it was going to look like, and I think that's very instructive because we have a lot of representations for what AR is going to look like, and I think they're all wrong. We'll see how it plays out. And what I want to do is, rather than talk about the normative aspects of AR, which we saw in the videos that Stellark showed and you've seen in the Google Glass video and even in the Sight video that's being passed around, what I want to do is actually talk about the destabilizing and disruptive impacts, which are the things that you get because you're using a technology to preserve something, because you're trying to actually manage all the data in the world. Last year was a very interesting year for a whole bunch of reasons. In February of last year, in the UK, the Conservative government introduced legislation that was going to raise the school fees enormously. And so there were a series of protests that took place in London. This is separate from the riots that happened later in the year. And the thing that was different about these protests is that many of the protesters had smartphones, and the smartphones were running an app called Suki. And Suki created a crowdsourced database of police movements so that the protesters could interactively know exactly where the cops were and not get kettled by them, because they were better connected on the ground than the cops were. And that's an augmented reality. So I want you to think about what happens now that we have revealed, because of WikiLeaks, TrapWire, which is all of the CCTV cameras being used around us to identify us by the security state apparatus. So what happens now when we walk out into public and we know that there is a recognition factor associated with that? How can we use AR in order to preserve our anonymity in those environments? And there's been suggestions that in fact the burqa is the appropriate response to this. But is it in fact perhaps the possibility that everyone watching everyone else through a surveillance means will tell you when you've been recognized, how long you can be exposed in public before you can actually be recognized? That's just sort of, I think that's the direction things are going to evolve in one dimension of the public sphere. The other dimension is what I call the TripAdvisor hypothesis. So when I travel now, and I travel a lot, I tend to use TripAdvisor as a guide, and I've taken to trying to stay in the first or second best rated hotel, go to the first or second best rated restaurant, etc., wherever I go. And so essentially what I'm doing is I'm getting the judgment of millions of people involved in my decision-making process. And what happens when that actually becomes something that is being continuously fed in through an augmented reality? And really, the distance between where we are and that is probably an app. It's not much more than an app. And what happens to the sense of personhood and decision-making when you are literally involving all of that other review information? And is that then an individual intelligence? Is it a mob intelligence? And what does it mean when you're using that to optimize every single moment, so that every single moment, because it is a 5-star experience, is a peak experience? And there are no bad experiences, there are no bad experiences. There are experiences that disagree with you, but there are no meta experiences anymore.
Great, thank you. Lots of disparate thoughts come into my mind as I was listening, and some of the things that I forgot to mention. Of course, one of the problems with an augmented reality system is that there are probably times when you want to forget, not be prompted to remember a particular person or a particular place. So this idea of digital forgetting becomes an aspect of augmented reality that needs to be factored in to how we operate and the ethics of doing all this. Another thought that I had with Second Life too is that there are more and more researchers, serious scientific researchers, who are streaming real life data into Second Life to better visualise and to experience that data in a more three-dimensional, kind of more seductive way. So that's another possibility. I would love to be able to seamlessly slide between a real vision of the world, an augmented reality, and a Second Life, depending on what time of day it is, or what my situation is, or whether I need additional information or not. So being able to switch and seamlessly slide between these modes of operation would make for a more compelling sort of interface. The other thing too with Second Life is that I think what we really need is a third life, a kind of, or maybe an inverse Second Life, where perhaps an autonomous and intelligent avatar might be able to access this body and perform with it in the real world. So instead of me activating an avatar in a kind of master-slave situation, it's more like a circular loop where avatars and bodies might take turns in accessing each other and performing particular tasks. So I think the more and more it'll be less and less meaningful, not only to talk about the difference between a human and a robot, but also to talk about a difference between the actual world and a virtual world. It'll get to a point where these things are seamlessly switching from one mode to the other, that it's just part of our extended operational capabilities.
I think, look, I'd just like to step in quickly there. My observation of Second Life, which I have looked at and written some AI agents in Second Life, but it's interesting to note that whilst Stellark, of course, uses Second Life in his performance art and explores the boundaries of a new reality as much as they can be explored, most people don't. Most people go into Second Life and it really just, with Dungeons and Dragons and sex, they really just bring in everything that they want from First Life but can't have, and they give themselves giant muscles and off they go, and they all sort of talk to each other in this tribal speak, and they role play. Basically, they role play what several million years of evolution have made us actually at core want. And so, to some degree, places like Second Life are a little bit retrograde, because they're really allowing people to be what the basic part of them wants to be, not necessarily the sort of where we necessarily want to go.
No, unfortunately, the human condition is replete with obsessions, desires, fantasies, and these probably will be expressed whether they're good or bad. So, in a sense, I myself am not interested so much in a fluid identity online. Obviously, my avatar is pretty much kind of fixed in a way with a particular identity that the artist wants to be associated with. On the other hand, the possibility of performing, in a transgendered, trans-species way and exploring perceptual and sensory experiences that other animals or might experience, insects or animals might experience, would be really fascinating. So the other thing that came to me too was the other obvious possibility of using augmented reality is if you're speaking to a speaker of another language. If someone is speaking Chinese to you and you're watching them speak Chinese, or you're hearing them speak Chinese, but the subtitles provide the translation. And I think that would be a wonderful capability. But of course, with all of these systems, you're both enabled but also encumbered, if not physically, encumbered by certain social, political and cultural expectations. So these things don't happen in a pure research environment. They happen because of a particular historical point in time with certain cultural and social implications.
So I'm really intrigued by this idea of new qualia, and after you said it, I came up with, I think, two very quickly, and I think the first one that would relate to mining, interestingly, is if you could develop a qualia that would allow coal miners to smell methane, right? And if they could do that, then they would be the canaries, and they would be able to get themselves out of trouble. But I think for just sort of normal Australians, we need a qualia that would allow us to sense ultraviolet light.
Yes, big problem in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, just sort of sun exposure. And we have to be taught to regulate it because we don't have an internal sense of it. And that would be the kind of thing where you could actually achieve, it would be an innovation that would end up being conservative.
And we grew up with an ozone layer, and in Scotland.
The other thing generally about technology too is that we shouldn't see it simplistically as being enabling. I think if technology generates sort of anxieties, new desires, then there are going to be new questions, new curiosities to explore. So to me, technology and all of these systems, whether they be augmented reality or any other kind of machine system, what's interesting for the artist is not so much that it affirms what it means to be human, because that's problematic, as was pointed out by Mark anyway. In fact, what it means to be human may be not remaining human at all, accepting the fact that this human construct is a historical and evolutionary construct, and it's going to change. So that's something else to take into account, that unless new technologies generate alternate images and information about the world and destabilise our present paradigms, then I don't think technologies serve much of a use if they're just simply enabling or affirming.
I think that, interestingly, one of the big drivers around AR is going to be around, rather than destabilizing, although it will have that effect, will be around conservative, it will be help people to manage the information. That in fact AR will be used mostly to filter information out and very selectively let it in, because we're getting more and more bombarded at us. If someone hands us a device that will be a very selective pair of sunnies, right, well, we will take it right up, and that's probably going to be the angle of approach.
I think the problem with artists is they tend to mess with systems. Usually it's not to use the instruments in the way that they've been designed or for the purpose upon which they've been ascribed to, but mess with the technology and see what accidents and unexpected possibilities occur.
Look, I'd like to just pose a question through to Mark in a roundabout way, extending on what Salak has been saying. As you know, a lot of kids will block their parents from Facebook. They obviously want to have their own private lives. They don't want the moral judgment of their parents. And as we just discussed, places like Second Life are often seen as freedom, where people can explore new personalities, much the same as probably adolescents do when they go through their teenage years. They explore different personalities and then they settle on to being their father or their mother or whatever they want to. But there is that exploration period, and Second Life, of course, that suddenly gives you that ability to do it again. So people have a midlife crisis and they run in there and put on an avatar that's 22 and off they go. And I'm sure there's a lot of 60-year-old women playing 22-year-old women in Second Life, as there probably are in real life.
There's a lot of 60-year-old men playing 22-year-old women in Second Life.
Absolutely. So, but the point is that these new worlds, these new niches like Second Life, exist because of a lack of communication. They exist because they have the privacy to go in there and be something else. You've all heard the horror stories of people who've not got jobs now because of something they posted on Facebook 5 years ago, or some affiliation that has come out through the web. Of course, people want this privacy so that they can explore new worlds, and in that exploration they may find something valuable. So sometimes over-communication can be a negative thing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's no question. I think that the phenomenon you're pointing to, which is that someone did something and it's on their Facebook and they lose a job, I think that phenomenon is transient. That's an edge phenomenon. In 10 years' time, everyone's Facebook is going to be filled with them throwing up on Swanston Street. It is, and if you don't have that in your Facebook profile, it's going to be sus. Already, the question was asked by the public media last week, because there was a report published, if you don't have a Facebook page, are you a sociopath? Right? And this question was asked in honesty, or maybe it was asked on Today Tonight, I don't know. I just saw it fly by on my Twitter feed. And so we are actually sort of crossing a gradient now where the expectation is that it is shared. I think that there are generational divides around sharing versus oversharing, and we will, I think, as a culture, come to accept that people and are imperfect, because it's not going to be the imperfections of one or another. It's going to be the imperfections of 5 billion people, and no one's going to stand out very much in that range, probably.
Are there any questions to prompt the panel? Yes?
I was just wondering if I could get the panel's opinion on Google Glasses.
Google Glasses?
Yeah, that development.
I mean, the technology for Google Glass, it's not glasses, it's glass. Google Glass has been around, for a long time. It's not an implementation of the hardware, it's what's in there. Right? Is it just the same as holding your mobile up to your eye all the time? Have we developed a UX, a user experience, that makes sense with that doesn't cause people to have accidents because there are things crowding their visual field which we need to focus on, and we automatically focus on because that's how we're wired. So there's a lot of learning that needs to happen in that space, I think, before that device becomes anything more than a curiosity, and perhaps even a dangerous one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a difficulty with new technologies because they're not going to be miniaturized enough, or of a high definition quality enough, or able to cope with various types of eyesight conditions and so on. There are always going to be those kinds of difficulties initially, but the idea of, a contact lens or a pair of goggles that are light enough but can also display useful bits of information, I think that's very seductive. But as Mark said, that idea has been around for a long time, but it was much more encumbered in previous decades.
The military have used it for a long time. Of course, the Air Force have had heads-up displays for a long time, but of course they need augmented reality because most of the time they're in a sort of grey mist, and so they need to have the position of the enemy aircraft or the target displayed for them on their heads-up display, augmented by a little green diamond or whatever it is, so that they can actually see where it is relative to the aircraft, because there's no way that they could see it with the naked eye. So in those cases, of course, augmented reality is essential, and they therefore have it. In terms of augmented reality for persons walking around, it's often, ironically, being used the opposite way. Rather than give information, it's still giving information to the individual, but it's really more control. You're saying to the individual, do this, go over there, and put yourself in this position, as opposed to giving them COP, current operating picture information. At this stage, most of the time, it's simply giving them instructional information so that they can work better as a team, so that the overall team operates in a coherent and effective manner.
Yeah, and I would suspect you can switch them on and off, or use them. I mean, just as we decide to go online or for longer or shorter periods, it has to be useful in terms of your own functioning, and of course not to be used in a dangerous way that might be too distracting. So I think with all new technologies, you need to learn to manage them. But also, I think as our technological terrain becomes increasingly complex, then I'm afraid that we are going to be increasingly conditioned or synchronised, as it were, to effectively operate within that space, that consensual sort of operation. So, for example, there are certain road laws and signs that I have to obey, and you all have to obey, for us all to safely accelerate at 100 kilometres an hour. So I'm afraid that with increasing complexity of our terrain that we have to negotiate, there will be increasing conditioning and increasing sort of rules of operation. I don't see how we can avoid that if we're going to sort of share a common operation.
Which of course only ups the ante for mischief.
Yes, Ray?
Right.
I can see the need and the practical aspects of augmented reality for such things as engineering tasks and mining and so on. But if it turns out to be a kind of a cultural addition to humankind, in what way will it diminish our capacity to imagine?
Alfred Whitehead, the philosopher scientist, said that he asserted that our imaginations are only as good as our instruments. which is just sort of indicative of the fact that ideas don't just kind of happen in here. We're prompted by what new technologies generate and what new images are produced and so on. I think we have to sort of, I don't think we should be stuck with a sort of nostalgic and romantic view of the human, that the human is somehow creative and imaginative and that technology will increasingly automate us and perhaps, create a more sort of sterile human existence. I think instruments and machines have been aids and enhancements and destabilising agents all in one, and I'm happy to sort of try to manage that relationship.
And there, very good recent research has shown that, in fact, the most creative people actually are quite well connected, but are not over connected. And there's a line, or we're starting to understand that line, but creative communities tend to be creative individuals connected to other creative individuals. So insofar as AR facilitates that kind of connectivity and sharing, it can be a creative instrument.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in my experience, look, if you want to kill pub conversation, turn up with an iPad. Whatever the conversation is, whatever the silly little argument, you can answer it, of course, and everyone just sits around looking at their beer and all conversation dies. So it's a real conversation killer, and I reckon Google Glass will take it to the next level.
Yes?
Yeah, actually, ask somebody else and I'll reform my question.
Okay, yeah, yes.
Those questions for Mark. You were saying that you think that augmented reality will happen in a way that people haven't really thought of yet. Can you sort of elaborate on that and what do you think the general idea of what it is now and what do you think it will actually be?
I mean, that's why I was drawing an analogy between what we thought VR was going to be and what VR has turned out to be. Because VR is pervasive now, but no one calls it VR. It's, 3D rendered live video game, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But so it's subtly different. And when you go to a 3D film, Avatar is mostly VR, right? Because it's mostly rendered animation. So we've got these very sort of blurry lines where we don't call it VR. It's not singled out as VR, and yet all of the technology in it is VR. And I suspect that that's it. We already have an enormously AR'd environment from our smartphones, and people stare down into their smartphones because they're giving them data about the world around them, whether that's the proximal world or the world of their connections. And so it slides back and forth. And so we actually already have lots of AR, just not quite in this format where it's beaming into your eye. And this is, what I want us to not get hung up on this beaming into your eye. I think that's part of the mix, but I don't think that's what we're really saying.
Yes.
We've already touched on the idea of Facebook and the inherent loss or lack of relevance of privacy and things like that. Do you think that as global consciousness evolves and people grow up with the idea of being connected to everybody, the naysayers are always going on about how there'll be no privacy, there'll be no individuality, everybody will be constantly bombarded with information. But I suspect the line you were talking about, Mark, where highly creative people tend to be more connected, yet only to a point. Do you think that reflects whether we will ultimately end up being constantly connected or hyper-connected when we want to?
Well, we're still negotiating that, right? It was interesting, you're using Facebook in one of your projects to get people to operate one of the machines to start.
Oh, yes, sorry. So I was looking at it now. Yes.
So now, how are you using that in this boundary sort of between AR and VR? Because I think there's some of the answers in this.
Yeah, we're sort of still developing that, but we're basically making possible therapy available from using a remote platform with this ambidextrous arm, but via Facebook rather than. So in other words, it's a more social way where individuals who happen to be amputees can communicate more effectively and collectively and can access the remote platform. But the details of this are still being worked on, but it's certainly a direction that we're going through.
See, the reason I find this interesting is because I see all these specific sites where sharing is really intensely valuable, and that don't actually touch on issues of privacy. And Facebook it's the McDonald's of social networks, in that it's just sort of the same bland meal for everybody. And the place that we're actually going to is highly specific forms of sharing, where what you gain is going to be much more important than what you lose, and that they're going to be better at being able to manage the boundaries around privacy. Because Facebook is a one-size-fits-all, there's just all sorts of bleed over that just should never happen. But as we get into these highly specialized forms of sharing, I think we're actually going to be able to get better at it. We have to remember, every part of this is a learning process, including the meta level of the tools we're building for sharing, because you take a look at the evolution of the tools from Friendster, sort of the first social network, all right? They're much better now than they were, and we're going to laugh 10 years from now about how pathetic they are.
We've been talking about augmented reality, especially around our social selves. And it's interesting what kind of social formations may arise in even academic circles with augmented reality, which may enhance the individual's ability to think and free up a lot of working memory on solving problems rather than indexing things. So I'm just wondering if you have any comments on where that sort of direction may go.
You might have noticed a really neat utilitarian possibility there, that the image, the coded image that's recognised in the augmented reality system, you can also turn that into a lens that magnifies, what you're reading, for example. So it's not just simply, like a pop-up comic book, or, there are some possibly interesting utilitarian uses, aside from designing, a building, scaling it up and down, rotating, looking into the interiors and so on. It's virtual reality, on a card, basically. And this image or augmented reality object can be in 3D, it can be examined on all sides, it can be in colour, it can be animated, and this is happening right now. And you can, you could do a music video, an augmented reality music video if you wanted to, and probably has been done. But I think the best way of balancing this or negotiating this public-private situation is that if any new technology promises increasing individuation of people, as well as simultaneously enabling them the means by which to more cohesively connect. And in a sense, that's what the internet is. I still have a choice of, going online or not going online, or fitting that in between everything else I do. So I'm functioning seemingly as an individual, that might be delusional, but then whenever I do want to collectively collaborate, I can crowdsource something more.
We also, on the privacy issue, we also have a genetic predisposition to privacy. We obviously want to be private while we're asleep, or at least with only people of our immediate family for survival. a survival of the species.
Sometimes with complete strangers.
Well, I mean, I guess it's where the boundaries, the tribe is not a private environment. So, and for most of our history, so until 10,000 years ago, we were essentially tribal. And the tribe is not a private environment. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Now, they may not know the complete nature of a person's interiority, all of a person's thoughts and feelings, but they're going to have a really good sense of what they are. The modern idea of privacy really does come after the urban revolution, when you had huge numbers of people living together, and it became necessary, because you didn't know everyone well enough to trust them, to be able to pull back and create your own space where you could feel safe, right? Your own cave, yeah. And so both of those natures are actually inside of us. The urban nature is rather newer, that drive for privacy, but so is that drive to actually be open and sharing with the people that we're close to. And this is where social media is acting as an amplifier, because it does give us that capability to share and connect, but unfortunately and fortunately, we're doing it with 5 billion people.
And with augmented reality, of course, what you're setting up is the possibility of an intelligent, responsive environment. So it's not totally dependent on human agency, and again, the idea that you have free will and free agency. I mean, that's in a very limited way you have, but to equally construct responsive and intelligent social spaces becomes, an imperative now.
More on the philosophical side, do you think privacy and the what Buddhists call an current overinflated sense of self will change with the technology?
I think what we're getting now is not so much an overinflated sense of self, but rather what, again, Mark was alluding to an extruded self. So your self isn't bounded by your body anymore, because I can, punch numbers and speak to you in London or Skype, video Skype with you, and then with the increasing proliferation of haptic devices, we're going to have what I call phantom flesh and fractal flesh, where you get force feedback with the remote agent that you're interacting with, whether it's an artificial agent or another person or a machine system. So they're very fascinating possibilities. But for me, I think that we need more surveillance inside our bodies because we're not very elegantly engineered. Nothing alerts us at a cellular level that, we've got some malignant cells here that'll, in 6 months or a year become an inoperable tumour. If we could detect these by colonising the body with nanobots, sensors and surveillance systems that inhabit the inside of the body that augment our bacterial and viral populations. So more surveillance as long as it's internal.
To take up the philosophical line again, I think that one of the problematic areas around social media as we use it now is that it does over-represent the self. It over-concretizes the self. It makes the self more real than it has any right to be. And so the Facebook timeline, and I've just had, let's say, and I haven't, but let's just say I've had a divorce. What happens to my Facebook timeline? Oh, that's my wedding day. Oh my God, I don't ever want to be reminded of that. And we know about this, that the power of forgetting is just as important. So these instrumental representations of the self make the self more real than it really is. And it's problematic.
And the trouble with data archiving, online archiving at the moment, is that, yes, potentially that information is forever remembered, forever prompted, and possibly forever embarrassing. So, if we see human experience and human memory as dynamic, unstable, and constantly changing, perhaps that's what we should be aiming for with digital memory as well.
In the robotics field, there's been a huge amount of interest recently in anticipation of the growth, as Bill Gates predicted about 5 years ago, that robotics is now at the stage PCs were 20 years ago. And we're going to see a huge proliferation. Now, one of the big pushes is to build anthropomorphic robots, because it's said that humans culturally better react with people that look like them. But with augmented reality, you can have your avatars walk out of the space, look like anything on Earth, and be seen as human.
Yes. Mind you, there's still a problem with human-like robots and interacting with them because of the uncanny valley.
No, they need not be human, need not be anymore themselves. Why not overcome this by having people initially wear glasses that acclimatize them to accept these strange beings that look like Meccano sets on wheels, and see them as humans, and gradually say, hey, they're not so scary after all, and go back to real reality as a type of transition stage.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as an artist who sort of experimented and performed with machines, I think what's important is not only to construct an interface, but to experience it directly and thereby be able to meaningfully articulate something. And I think the more and more we interface intimately with our technology, the more and more we will feel at ease with our operation with them. Yes.
I asked a question about the effect of AR on the brain.
Loss of hair.
A couple of years ago, I remember going to a public lecture at the university about the brain and intelligence, and particularly mathematical intelligence. And it showed that particularly mathematically intelligent people had hotspots in focused areas of the brain rather than diffuse areas of the brain. On the other hand, we also know that the brain is plastic. That is, it can learn new things. New neuronal pathways can be developed, grown. And I was thinking about this when you were talking about, in particular, AR with Google Glass, or having extra information coming into the central nervous system or visually, which feels as though it would be distracting. So the question is, do you know if there's research about whether or not the brain will become more passive in a way and simply receive this additional information, or whether the brain will, through its plasticity, learn to accommodate the additional information and become more complex, or an additional layer of complexity? I'm not sure.
Well,
is there any, we can imagine either way, but is there any research?
There's some research around multitasking, which is sort of where you're asking here, and that we're not really great at it. Some people are, and there's a bell curve, and some people...
No, it's men who are not very good at it.
Some people are not good at it. Some people are. And there's some very simple tests that can sort of put you on a scale of where you are around that, and that seems to have some correlation to how busy your visual field is going to be, how many inputs you can sort of handle simultaneously, and it's a range, but the range is relatively fixed. There isn't any sense that I know of that we know how to push beyond that, because it may simply represent cognitive limits. But no one knows.
If that's true, with the augmented reality, isn't it really dangerous that people could pay attention to the additional incoming data and not pay attention to other things that normally they would be paying?
Well, the simple answer to that would be it might be more dangerous, but for example, I would prefer not to have to glance at my GPS stuck on the window to the left-hand side of my body every now and again to, confirm. But if it's displayed to me, in my field of vision, in a way that would be a more convenient. But that's only one example.
But it's highly task dependent, because if you're talking about dropping bombs, then it's a good thing. If you're talking about operating on a patient, yeah, actually you want that data in your visual field. So that's why it can make you safer in some situations, and it can make you less safe in others, and it is very much context dependent.
And in addition to that, of course, the brain is very much use it or lose it. If you don't use something, the brain will tend to negate that area. So if you give the brain some kind of external stimuli that classifies a signal for you, the brain will learn to use that to the detriment of its own internal processing it used to do that. If you have anti-lock braking systems on your car, you won't be as good at stopping a car if the anti-lock braking systems aren't working, because you aren't trained to do that. So it's two-way. On one hand, the signal is being augmented by the augmented reality system, so you're performing better with the signal for the goal that you're tasked to do. But on the other hand, of course, your brain is dumbing itself down, or hopefully it's freeing up processing to be used somewhere else. Another part of the problem, but generally not.
And the idea of whether technology sort of pacifies the body is an interesting one, because, of course, if you're, driving a vehicle at 100 kilometres an hour and you're going around a corner, your body is pacified, strapped in, only able to safely, turn the wheel a few degrees here or there. Your foot is on the accelerator again, incrementally only a few degrees of pressure. Having said that, all of a sudden the Kinect sensor happens, and instead of musicians sitting at their laptops perfectly static, now musicians are performing, changing the volume, the pitch and the tone of a sound by, and it's kind of, it's actually comical almost that technology, or some of the new technologies, are now reanimating the human body and making it perform and respond in, for me, quite embarrassing ways.
Could be embarrassed.
Oh, I am.
There was a documentary several weeks ago about someone who wore a belt which buzzed according to where north was. And this person habituated to it. After several weeks, this person said they were not aware of buzzes, they just knew where north was.
Yes.
Now what you want is your GPS to have the same effect.
Yes.
If you just know where to go,
Yes.
you don't need to even look at anything.
Yeah.
And that's probably the end result of this type of augmentation, where the human system simply integrated so it's not seen as a foreign input.
There's another example which actually we're all familiar with, and so familiar with we don't think about it. No one knows how to do long division anymore. I mean, we all remember vaguely, if we had to, we could rip out a sheet of paper and do it, but it's a pain in the ass, and we don't, because there's a calculator and everything. And so whatever neurology was used to remember how to do long division, it's gone, it's left.
There's my favourite cartoon is someone selling desk calculators 10% discount because number 9 is missing.
A little bit was said earlier today about the emerging stuff with the brain or the mind being able to control stuff without making contact. So whether or not it fits in within the scope of the panel, what do you see happening with mind reading, and how will that shape things?
Yeah, well, there's been some interesting research. I can't really give you sort of adequate technical details, but I'll allude to it. Now, I'm sure you can Google it and find out more specific information. But recently, there was work done on getting someone to watch a movie, and then monitoring their brainwaves, watching the movie, and then being able to crudely reconstruct the movie from that brainwave, those brainwave signals. So, in other words, and they did this with a number of test subjects, and strikingly, you could see a similarity, of everyone's kind of brainwave kind of reading of that movie, of that same movie. So that's kind of interesting that you're now at the point where you might be able to analyse brainwaves, not only for that particular and peculiar spike that occurs just before you do something, and being able to use that as a control signal, but now possibly being able to reconstruct a memory of a movie or a memory of something else. You know?
Many of us don't want our minds read.
Oh,
Tinfoil helmet.
Yes.
Brings up a question. A lot of people are afraid today, maybe the economy of their fear of being watched comes from above, like a hierarchical sort of like Big Mother looking down on you. But these days, we've really just encountered that there's a lot of people watching us from the sidelines. All our friends are watching us, all our...
Surveillance.
Through surveillance, right? Or the participatory panopticon. So, I mean, where do you think do you think in the future people will be more afraid of being watched by people in general?
Oh, I look forward...
brothers and sisters, or do you think... where do you think the future of fear will be, and where do you think the future...
Oh, I look forward to my cluster of hovering drones that with a blink of my left eye I can direct them in their swarm with their swarm intelligence to go look for something or go, you know, pick up a pizza slice or something. But this idea of again having a disembodied eye, which is, you know, with these personal drone devices now, they can be very, very small. There's work being done recently on a small flying robot that mimics a hummingbird flapping its wings, you know. So, you know, you mount a small webcam on that and you can stream all that information online or to your own personal head-up display. So there, you know, again, interesting possibilities of having disembodied vision. And so your eyes are no longer just in your head. That's just your biological location. It's very limited. You know, being able to sort of disconnect your eyes or to have additional eyes. That would be great.
I don't think it's quite fair to ask a performance artist if he likes being looked at. But, I mean, look, the reality is there's going to be times where you want to be private, don't you? You don't want people watching you in the bathroom, I guess. And so at some point, you're going to want to, you've got a natural desire to have some kind of privacy.
I did make 3 films of the inside of my body, and the last one I did was 90 centimetres into the colon. So I have some footage on YouTube. I have to say though that it did impress some of my friends. The endoscope's really long.
What I think is really interesting is that when we go out in public, we are already, and we tend to not be aware of it, but we're already being captured when we're out in public, generally, if you're in a city, certainly. And of course, we're being captured because our mobile carriers know where we are every minute of the day, or at least they know where our mobiles are, which is generally on our body. And we tend to think about that not at all. So there's already this element of surveillance that's pervasive, but to turn it around, when I go out in public within, you know, the next 5 years or so, I'll probably be able to make myself optionally someone else's eyes that they'll be able to look through whatever sensors I have on me, so that Stellark will be able to pop out and have a look around or whatever. And that this is going to be very normal. People will just think about, oh yeah, I'm out in public, so therefore I'm going to offer it up publicly. Or I'm at some special thing and I want people to have a look in, which we already do. Ustream is already doing this in a very sort of web-centric form. But once that becomes, but you know, you saw with all the Occupy Wall Street riots, the ones that were going on in Oakland, I was watching them as they were happening because there was a fellow with a mobile and with wireless access, and that was it. And so I had my eyes in the middle of a riot, something you could never really do before. And so that kind of thing is going to become, it's going to go from the extraordinary to the pervasive over the next few years. It's again, the future being unevenly distributed.
Yeah, the idea of people as portals of sort of remote experience. So now my sensory experience is determined by my proximity, by my physical location, but if I could see with your eyes in London here with Ray's ears from Monash, you know, and have someone from Tokyo remotely activating my left arm performing a task, then yeah, that would be a very interesting experience of, in a sense, having a multiplicity of agents sort of occupying and operating your body. Oh.
Okay, well, officially it's break time now. So if the panellists want to continue to converse, that's fine. But we'll be cutting into the break. The break is for half an hour. And so after the break, at 5 o'clock sharp, we have Marcus Hutter, who's going to be speaking on universal AI. So don't miss that one. So yeah, feel free to mingle. There's bananas out there, coffee, tea, whatever. Cheers.